Good evening and welcome to PTSD911 Presents. This is a podcast for first responders and those who support first responders. On this show, we talk about mental health and wellness for first responders, and our goal is to have deep conversations that inspire and motivate first responders to take care of themselves and their peers when it comes to their mental health. My name is Conrad Weaver. I'm so glad you stopped by to listen or to watch the show. If you're watching on YouTube, I encourage you to log in and let us know in the comments where you're from, and if you're a first responder or not. And while this show is pre-recorded, we do monitor and engage in the chat, so we'd love to connect. And if you haven't already subscribed, hit that subscribe button, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts or another podcast app. Please subscribe. That way you don't miss an episode. We'd also really like to know what you think about the show and how we could improve it, so please leave us a review. We'd appreciate it very much. Dennis Blocker II is a trained EMT and a firefighter, and he spent 21 years as a trauma tech at a level 1 trauma center. Over those years, he kept a journal, which he turned into a book called Clear, which details his 23 years in emergency medicine and then his battle with PTSD that almost took his life. Dennis is a public speaker and is now doing all he can to bring awareness about PTSD in emergency medicine. Today's conversation is deep. It has a lot of information in it. It has subject matter that may trigger some people. We talk about some of the things that Dennis has seen and heard during his time in the emergency room or at a trauma center. So just be aware that there are things in this conversation today that are pretty sensitive. So I want you to be aware of that. Anyway, here's my conversation with Dennis Blocker. Well, Dennis Blocker, welcome to PTSD 911. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's an honor. Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit, for those who don't know who you are, tell me a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
I was a military brat, Air Force brat. My dad was a cop and in the Air Force. I was born in Inglewood, California. Of course, that means you travel a lot, and which was a great experience. I mean, we lived in Iceland and Guam and Michigan, California, Texas. And I will have to say, though, that when we got orders from Iceland to Texas, my mom cried.
I can imagine.
Just because of the change in temperatures. But when I once upon a time, I wanted to do mission work in Congo, in Zaire. Back then it was Zaire. Mobutu was the president then. And I took a trip there to see if that's what I wanted to do. We spent a month in the jungles. And I solidified it. I was 16 at the time, and I was like, this is what I want to do. And so I pursued a seminary degree. And I was injured, though, in the Congo, and quite severely. And I discovered how important medical was, because the only person medical with us was a veterinarian. And I just had to tough it out. And you're 3 days into the jungle. That's 3 solid 24-hour days, not 3 American 24-hour days. But so it was you have to tough it out. And then in college in Oklahoma City, I was sitting in class April 19th, 1995. And I had my briefcase on my lap, and had my notepad out and getting ready to take notes. And it was 9:02, and the left side of our classroom just went boom. And then over the rafters, you could hear boom, 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 boom. And then the opposite wall went boom, and the glass just shimmered, and plaster was falling from the ceilings. And of course, we went outside into the hallway and discovered that, the Alfred P. Murrah building in downtown Oklahoma City had been bombed by Timothy McVeigh. And I'll never forget when we were looking at the news, one of the newscasters was sobbing and just begging, we need all medical people downtown now, all medical people. And Conrad, that feeling of seeing 3 or 4 students pile into a car, going off to help, and me just standing there with nothing to give, left quite an impression on me. And so I knew that I needed some medical training. One, I was going to head off to the Congo, but 2, I saw that you never know when something's going to happen. And
Mhm.
I never wanted to be that guy again who was just left there standing with nothing to give the community
Mhm.
in an emergency.
Do you think that is kind of something that in the first responder community, that's a common thought that, hey, I don't want to be that guy that's just standing there?
That's a really good question. When I was in the trauma team and I would orient someone, we would see nurses who their whole life knew that that's what they wanted to do. They wanted
Mm.
to be a nurse. They wanted to work trauma. And then you would see them 2 hours later clock out and go home because there's 100 people in the waiting room waiting to come back. The wait time for patients is 24 hours. We've got 10 cop cars out in the ambulance bay, 15 ambulances, psych patients lining the hallways, screaming, hitting each other. You've got gunshots coming in through the front, through the side doors. And it was just, they realized that they didn't have it. And I'm sure, since interviewing all the people that you have, sir, that you know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, to your question, that anyone who is in a situation and they have that urge and they hear that voice in the back of their mind or in their heart that says you have to do something, that's where the paramedic is first born. That's where the emergency trauma nurse is first born, right there.
How soon after that event did you sign up to go become an EMT?
Well, at the time I had a scholarship with the college, and I was on a men's singing group, and so I had a scholarship to sing, and we would. The thing was we had to give up our summer, and so which fine, I get to travel and across the United States and see places I probably never would have seen, and Canada, and so I couldn't do it that summer, but the next summer, matter of fact, my sister and I did it together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But what was interesting was, and this really hit home, and I think as an EMT, and all the EMTs out there and paramedics would really understand this, but our instructors in class were all firemen who had been down at the Alfred P. Murrah building.
Wow.
So they had that experience and they were dead serious about teaching us, that gave them quite a resolve. And in turn, that was, imbued to us.
So it's interesting that an event like that, and I think if you look back at what happened on 9/11, I think a lot of people joined the military because of that event. It takes a tragedy to kind of propel someone into a new line of work or a new mission or new passion. And obviously that's where you went. You went to become, a helper, right?
Yes, sir.
So what was that
Mr. Rogers'
process
mother.
like when you first started was it what you expected when you first started studying, emergency procedures? Was it what you expected, or was it like, oh, this is something
really
different?
If you're worth your salt, you've done your research, and you're excited about it, and so you kind of have an inkling. But what's in the back of your mind the whole time is you're just praying that you have it. Like, I remember one of my students, one of the students in there with us, he had a photographic memory, so he aced every single test that we did, and then he would get the bonus question. And then during these scenarios, he was able to pull up, and he would just go down step by step, very sterile, but he was right. Whereas me, I'm getting 80, 82 on the test and struggling because I'm also, a full-time, student, and I've got other obligations and working full-time job and this and that. And, I'm struggling, but there's just, when he was in the field, he was not able to, when it was the real world, he was not able to access those files. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was like fear had shunted his ability to access those files. And whereas me and others, we were able, it just made us more clear, and it made it, we became more zoned in on it, and it was just flowed, and we just jumped in. And that's what's the danger of it, right? Is that you don't know if you have that ability till you're there.
in the first part of your book, you talk about that first call that you went on when you were still in training, I guess. Can you
Yes,
describe
that's
that
right.
and what happened? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was something else.
Yeah, so you were able to kind of figure out a problem that you had. There was an upside down
Yeah, that
vehicle,
was
and
this really interesting, and the shift was, the saying in EMS is if you have a student, nothing's going to happen. And
it's
it
kind of like
proved
you have a
true
ride
that.
along. Like I do ride alongs. Whenever I ride along, nothing happens.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. If you have a ride along, that's why paramedics love ride alongs because they're going to finally get to eat. They're going to catch up on documentation on patients and this and that. So when my paramedics that had me that day with the service there at Bethany, Oklahoma, they were really excited to have me that day. And sure enough, nothing, hour after hour after hour. And, of course, I'm just dying. I'm just like, this is insane. And then in the wee hours of the morning, the tones went off and their pagers, and we got a call to a vehicle out in the rural area that had rolled off the highway. And what was interesting about it was that it had rolled uphill, and then momentum and gravity then fought each other to a standstill. And then it rolled back downhill. But on its turn, the last of its turns, he flew out the window, and he was pinned underneath the hood of the truck. And but the truck was at an angle, resting against a tree that, as we approached, was creaking. It was a really difficult situation, and I vividly recall, and all first responders will attest to this. I vividly recall the smell of the decay of the forest, of the diesel in the grass, the cool, crisp air, the strobes bouncing off the bushes, and then this hum of the generator as they put the lights on the scene, and they secured straps to the vehicle, and they secured the scene for us. And then that's when I saw that, if doing the math, and if I crawl under here, his foot should be right there, because that's the only thing that was pinning him was his lower leg. And so I just mentioned it to one of the fire captain there. And he said, yeah, let's do it. So I just jumped down. I didn't wait. I just jumped underneath the vehicle like a crazy person, and I just started digging. And then they got me some tools, and we got him out. And there's no greater feeling than someone that you respect, especially young men especially will be able to identify, when you get that clap on the back from an older man who says, "Great job," that's something you'll never forget. And that was been, decades ago.
Yeah.
Still remember it.
So that was really the launch of your career in
Yes,
emergency services. So you don't have to go into all the details, but you ended up, going to work in that field, and then you kind of had some advanced degrees as well. To kind of tell us a little bit about your journey there.
Yes. So then I went back home to San Antonio, and by that time, Africa had closed. That part of Africa had closed down, civil wars and whatnot, and so that wasn't an option anymore. And then my life goals sort of changed, and started pursuing other things. And I got on with EMS back in San Antonio. Then I got onto a volunteer fire department, and we went to the fire academy, and that's when I got some exposure to, because we were rural. They gave me a pager and a medical bag, an oxygen tank, and trauma bag, and they gave me a red light with a magnet on it, and they put a siren on my little Chevy Cavalier, and so I was an official woo-woo, and they said, when you get a call, go. You're the closest. It's in your neighborhoods. So, and that was very interesting, because I had several interesting calls, in that time.
Was that more as a volunteer? Was this a volunteer?
Totally, yes, sir. That was all volunteer.
I have a lot of respect for volunteer firefighters and medics, just because I live in Emmitsburg, Maryland, where is the home of the National Fire Academy, National Emergency Training Center. And our firehouse here is pretty much all volunteers. There's a couple EMTs that are full-time staff, but most everybody else is volunteer. And the siren still goes off, even though they don't necessarily need it because of modern technology. But, when the siren goes off at 2:30 in the morning, it wakes me up and I'm like, those guys are jumping out of bed, going to a call, and I'm safe and comfortable in my warm bed,
Yes,
So
sir.
I have a lot of respect for volunteers who, leave their home. Sometimes they leave, family functions and all the other things that goes on with life to take care of someone else's emergency. So,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
I would be in the shower and I remember the pager went off. I was in the shower and it was in the early morning hours, maybe 9 a.m. And I was off that day and it was a structure fire. So I just jumped out and still dripping wet, threw on my clothes, sprinted to the fire station, and it was just me and another guy, and he was an active San Antonio fireman. And so he did that on the side and it was just him and I. And we topped the hill, and on the distance on the horizon, you just see this giant pillar of smoke coming from the middle of the subdivision. And we just hooped and hollered like Braveheart on the hill. It's insane when you think about it. It's like two guys,
Right.
So we put the call out, just meet us at the scene. And I was the nozzleman, the first guy through the door, and it was something else.
Yeah. So how did you then make the transition into trauma, into the trauma unit?
My other job was EMS and ambulance, and my paramedic partner, recommended that I try the trauma because he knew I wanted to expand my knowledge and experience. So he had worked there previously, and he put in a good word for me. And I just showed up one day and talked to the boss, and they said, "Yeah, come on, take you on part-time." So that was my, I thought I was going to go in and just immediately knock it out of the park. And no, that's not how it goes.
So how does it go for those of us who are uninitiated? How does it go?
So the beauty of EMS is you get to drop off the patient. You stand at the door, take care.
Yeah, right.
And then you go out and you clean your unit and you get ready for the next call. Well, the ER, they got them.
Yeah.
They got them. So they go home. They're whatever state they're in, or whether they're covered in whatever kind of human fluids or whatever's happened to them, they're the ones that have to deal with it. And that was quite eye-opening for me, because just the sheer numbers of people, the chaos of the trauma county level 1 trauma center, the screaming everywhere, and the police running down the halls. You could hear all their keys, especially the hospital police. They got like 50,000 keys. And I just vividly recall that shh, 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 as they're running down the halls. And that's how you know something's going on, because they never ran anywhere. And, just all of that. And that's a big test on you, whether or not, because one, I remember there was this nurse, Peggy Spriggs. She's from Canada. She was a Jedi master. She was just amazing. And I remember we had this code come in, and she turns to me and hands me this syringe of blood and says, "Get me a CBC, PT, PTT, Chem 13, INR, and a type and screen." And I'm just staring at her. And she points to the cart and goes, "Blue top, purple top, green top, pink top." I'm like, okay, that's fireman proof. I can do that. So I was like, colors I can do, So it was definitely on the job training. And they wanted medics because we had the field experience and we knew dealing with folks. But there was definitely a learning curve. You had to learn splints and and especially in the trauma room. And I hope I'm not going to disgust anyone, but I would get the runs when I knew I was going to be in the trauma room for my next shift, just because I knew that I didn't know jack. And these folks had seconds to live sometimes. And of course, they never just left me alone in there. because they knew I didn't know anything. But, if you have anything, if you're worth your salt, you want to make a difference, right? And you want to be a factor. And that is a theme very evident in my book about being a factor. And I didn't want to just collect a paycheck. And, it was interesting. Sometimes we would have to tackle folks. I remember one case where a guy was beating up a sheriff deputy and a policeman. And me and an orientee of mine, who had been an Army Ranger, we turned a corner and saw the police were losing. And matter of fact, the assailant had the police officer's thigh in his mouth. And he had the female deputy in a headlock. And then he swooped his hand down, and he had his hand on the pistol grip of her weapon and was yanking on it, trying to get it out. And so he and I had to step in and take care of the situation, and everything that entailed. But, you're doing that. And then 5 minutes later in the Level 1 Trauma Center, you're stepping into a room and, good morning, Mrs. Johnson. I'm going to go ahead and get your blood pressure. And I'm sorry, I'll speak louder. You can't hear me? Okay. My name is Dennis. I'm one of the medics here. We're, what I'm saying? And you're just transitioning from you were just about to die to let's get Miss Johnson to the restroom because she doesn't want to soil herself,
What's that do to your mind and your mind, your thought process?
When you're young, you're super stoked because you realize that you're the tip of the spear. The trauma level 1 is the medical's equivalent of the special forces, right? So it's not for everybody. And on January 1st, that I always worked New Year's. I requested New Year's night because it was going to be the Wild West, and I absolutely loved it. So the following morning, we would always go to Chacho's in the morning, and we would order what's called King Kong nachos, and it covers the whole plate. So you got the whole trauma team around this, and then the margaritas are coming out, and then other ERs are coming in because it's in the medical center, and then Methodist shows up, and Baptist shows up, and Santa Rosa shows up, and they all look over us. They're like, "You guys are university, aren't you?" And we're like, "Yeah, this that we can tell." Yeah, it's just a whole new ball game, and it's the alphas. There's no betas there. They're all alphas. And I had this kind of a joke that I would say about that. I wish that the great Steve Irwin had done a Crocodile Hunter episode in the ER, and I could picture him kind of creeping through the ambulance bay, looking left and right, and looking back at his cameraman and saying, "Easy, mate. This is the land of the alpha female."
Crikey.
Crikey. Because I'll tell you what, I have seen we used to call them the hobbits. There were these two nurses. They were about 4'10". And I saw her leap over a rail and jump on top of a guy who was strangling a nurse. And just this fire and zest, just incredible heart, just getting after it. It's just, you look back on it and you just thank your lucky stars you had the opportunity to meet such people and work with them.
Yeah. Kind of takes me back to my days working in a psychiatric hospital. And my kind of fresh out of college, I had a degree in psychology, had an opportunity to work in an adolescent program in a pretty big hospital system in South Carolina. And being a male in a psychiatric hospital, you get called to all the fun stuff, and all the combative adult patients, over in the lockup unit, and I remember coming home many times black and blue, just from the stuff that went down. And so obviously it's nothing like the trauma center. We didn't have blood and guts everywhere, but we had, psychosis.
No, but there's something, Conrad, there's something about working in an environment where it does something to your mind, where you're there to help people. And it does something too. At least it did to me. It really does something inside your heart and your mind when you get punched. And in an environment where you're trying to help.
Right.
And it's most of the time it's uncalled for. It was the quiet ones that I worried about. It wasn't the ones that were saying, I'm the devil, I'm the devil. It's not the one I'm worried about. The one I'm worried about is the guy who's just sitting there super quiet and stewing. And you could see the things that he's thinking about. It must be, so I understand, if you go home black and blue, you have that evidence every day of, you get to look at it and think about it.
Yeah. What did all those experiences do to you?
Well, in the beginning, you're young and you're in your 20s and you're all alphas and you're handling business. You brag about it and you laugh, but it starts to accumulate, especially the death of children. Can I show this to you? This is a journal that I started keeping when I was when I first started there. And I kept the journal because I realized early on that I was going to witness things that were going to change me forever. And there were things that I didn't want to forget. And so here, you see that obituary?
Yeah.
That's from 1998. That's Danielle Reina Reynosa. And that little sticker right there, I had given to her brother, who was standing beside her as they were viewing her body, and her family. They were hit by a drunk driver. And when I was cleaning the gray matter, her brains out of her hair, and getting her ready to be viewed, something happened in me, and the way I explained it to my mom and dad, because over time, then they started asking me, what happened to your joy? And I didn't really understand how to tell them, but they kept after it because they are great parents. And so finally one day I was just kind of angry, and I says, all right, you want to know? I didn't say it out loud, but I thought, all right, you want to know? I'll tell you. And I says, you guys provided us tremendous life, great parents, tons of love, and the morals and the courage and the character, all the lessons that they taught us, the way I described it to them was like they had given us a protective shield around my heart. It was going to be the thing that was going to always keep me on the right course. It was going to help me make the right decisions. It was going to protect who I was. And that when I cleaned the brains of this young girl, when I cleaned her brains out of her hair and I got her ready for her families to come view her, I told my parents, I says, there was, the best way I could describe it was that there was a dark, I just call it a darkness at the time, but I would later describe it as a dark passenger, where, like that show Dexter on Showtime, how he described it. But it was an invisible chisel, very small, and an invisible hammer. And that dark hand went up to that guard and just went pop one time, and a tiny fleck flew off. I didn't know what happened. It was imperceptible, but it did fly off into oblivion, and it would never be replaced. And that happened over and over and over again, because one thing about EMS is that you're going to get bad calls, but for most departments, not all, but most departments, it's going to be, the really bad ones are going to be once a month, maybe a couple times a month. But in the trauma center, that's what you do, and it's just day after day after day. And your joy dissipates. And then eventually that guard has a tiny hole that's gone all the way through, and it starts to seep in with this black, oily darkness that you start withdrawing from family, you start withdrawing from friends, you no longer want to hang out and do stuff. You'd rather just be by yourself, and that's dangerous.
Did you lose the joy for the work?
Well, that's interesting, Conrad, because, I'm a blocker. So we have this work ethic, and we are always mindful of doing our best no matter what. Even if we don't agree with the mission, we're going to do our best every single time. So even though I would have that darkness and I would be showering and getting ready for the shift, and I'd be nauseous knowing that I was going to be seeing more death, because your cup does get full.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just, you're passing your daughter's bedrooms to go to the car, and that serves to remind you that you have to go to work.
Mm-hmm.
You can't call in. You have to go. And then, people say, we'll get another job, but this is all I've ever done. This is what I know. This is what I'm good at. And I know that I can save people. And I love taking care of really sick people. And it's a vicious cycle because you're good at it. You love doing it, but it's, Conrad, my counselor, would later describe my job as a golden coffin. She said, your job is a golden coffin because it provides everything you need for your family and your life, but it's going to kill you. And that was a big revelation. I would, driving into work towards the end there, when I had to retire from the ER, one of my last shifts, I vividly recall looking up at the parking garage in the hospital district and thinking that if I stepped off of that parking garage, that my mind would finally be at rest. It wasn't a matter of depression or anything like that. It was just that when I was at night, I was having nightmares all night long, and my girls, Lauren, would wake me up and, Daddy, you're screaming, you're yelling. And, so you're not resting, and then you're working a 12-hour shift in the trauma, and you're on your feet, and you just want rest. And it's not, if I could describe it any way, I would say that thought of jumping off of that garage was more of just that, I'll finally be at peace. I'll finally be able to get some rest. And that scared me because it made sense. It sounded legitimate, like a great idea. And that scared me. And
did those kind of thoughts and things that kind of came through your mind, did they affect your work? Did they affect, how you did your job?
No, they didn't, but they definitely affected the way I trained new people. I became almost desperate in my training, trying to get them ready, trying to give them I didn't have any good advice at the time. And that's one of the reasons for my book was there was no education on mental health and how to process what we're seeing. It wasn't until the final couple of weeks that I talked to a counselor who gave me the tools that reprogrammed how I was processing what I was thinking about and what had been bothering me. So I was doing my best trying to train the new people and desperately prepare them so that they could last. And you almost feel sorry for them because not sweet people would become employees of the ER, and you would see that joy, and they were bouncy and effervescent and running here and there, and just this joy on their face when they would come in, and you feel sad because it's going to go away. And you don't want it to because you don't want them to change. And one nurse in particular, Kim, I just begged her, please don't stay. Like get your couple years in so you get this experience. And she did leave, and she's so glad that she did. But she went to the OR. And
are there people who kind of spend their career there?
Oh yes, they did. There's nurses like Peggy, 40-something years.
Wow.
There are nurses that can do it for 40 years. They just have that ability to. It's really remarkable when you think about it.
What do you think it is that, causes someone to be able to do that, to spend, a whole career in that kind of environment and still be able to do the job effectively?
I think they're successful because they, right from the beginning, remove themselves from the situation. Like they perform the tasks, but they don't associate their family with what's going on.
Mm.
For instance, if a nightmare that I always have and still have is, from time to time now, it's not as prevalent, but is a 10-year-old girl with long blonde hair. And when I prepared her body, she had been suffocated by a dog.
Mm.
And it just latched onto her throat and crushed her airway, and we couldn't get her back. But I think the reason that I would have nightmares of her is because she reminded me of my daughter.
Mm.
And I think those nurses that really last a long time and the paramedics that can do it forever, I think that they're able to not associate it with anything in their life. They just have this ability to, and it's tough because, let's face it, you as a patient, you want the nurse that is empathetic,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't want some hard-nosed Nurse Ratched coming in and, slinging you around their bed and this and that and being rough with you. You want someone coming in who's gentle and listens to your story and identifies with you and says, oh, my mother does the same thing. Those kind of things that you can, and put people at ease, right? That's the kind of healthcare person that you want. And that's what I want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that empathy that is who I am, but it's also the gateway to a disaster, because you are identifying, and it's hard not to. It's so hard not to.
Mm-hmm. What kind of resources did the hospital have for you, if any, regarding mental health and wellness?
There were none. There was none. It's interesting. I'm on a Facebook page called Emergency Departments Are for Emergencies Only. And it's started by an English doctor, and it's got, I think, 78,000 emergency personnel from Australia, New Zealand, America. It's just amazing. And a new nurse posted on there, we had a difficult code last night, and they didn't want to do a debrief because we were too busy. Does anyone have any ideas on what we can do to make this happen? And there were you can imagine the responses that came in. And I actually started creating a Word document, copy pasting the different cities or different countries and states that the responses were coming from and what they were saying. And basically the main theme was that just one theme was, we just go home and drink, or another one was tough, stiff upper lip, let's keep going. This is how it is. And there were maybe 5% that were there. They were actually worked in a facility that had a program.
Wow.
So that's the culture. It was as a matter of fact, my first day in the trauma, when I was introduced to the staff for the first day, they said, I'll never forget it. And, hello, hey guys, this is Dennis. I want to introduce him to you guys. This is his first day, so let's say hi. And the calls that came out was, welcome to Nam. You'll be sorry, just like the military. And what really stood out to me that day were their eyes. Right? Their eyes really stood out to me because they were hollow and dark circles. And I knew that this was a whole new group of people I was working with. And that culture of welcome to Nam is tough it out, stick it out, just deal with it. Let's all go drink it in the morning. It's the same for fire departments, police. The guys just drink a lot, alcoholics, a lot of divorce, because they're dealing with it by drinking. And you'll know you have a problem when you get home and you're angry. You're angry, and your anger doesn't match the situation. Like your 2-year-old is a 2-year-old. They're crying, and you just blow up, right? It's like, well, the 2-year-old doesn't understand that you want to watch the show. Like the anger doesn't match the situation. And 10 years before, you would have dealt with it fine. So yeah, that's a big sign that you've got some major problems going on, and you need to talk to a counselor.
At what point did you know that you had some problems going on, that you needed to get some help?
Yeah, interestingly, I knew it was a problem probably 10 years into it. and I still had 11 years to go. I didn't know it then, but I did leave the trauma team trying to help myself by going to a smaller ER. But what I hadn't counted on was, because of my experience working trauma as a medic, when I went to this new smaller ER, they leaned on me heavily. As a matter of fact, when I first showed up and the director interviewed me, she asked what kind of experience I had. I says, well, I can run the 8.5 French Quartus. I can get you an art line. I can get you CVP monitoring. I can get you level 1 rapid infuser. I know how to work a Lucas. And I just listed all this stuff, and her mouth dropped. And she looked over at the paramedic who was sitting there, who was also a medic in that department already. And they were looking at each other. And then she looked at me and she was like, can you train us on how to do that stuff? And so that was the theme of that place, was that I was then leaned on heavily because of the experience level. And so anytime anything went down, I had to step in, but I was there to rest. I was there but it didn't work out.
Was the call volume just as heavy as as the trauma center?
The call volume was not as heavy, no.
Mm-hmm.
No, thankfully. But, in my book, I do list the cases that were there. There's a lot of stuff that you can't put in because you'd have to get too descriptive with the details, and then people would be able to say, well, that was me, so you got to do it. You respect HIPAA. But, being leaned on heavily, and this is another problem is that the ER was responsible for responding to code blues in that hospital, the entire hospital. So if the ICU had someone that was going downhill or had CPR in progress, the ER responded, well, that's me and a nurse and the ER doc. And we go up there, and I'm not kidding, Conrad, the room would be full of people. And when the ER would show up, they would, like Moses in the Red Sea, they would part. And then we would go up there and start dropping IVs in them and getting meds pushed and IVs and CPR and this and that. And, everybody's clapping us on the back when we're walking out, but they don't realize, what's going on inside you, but you keep doing it. You just keep doing it. You got a family to feed.
Do talking about these things and thinking about these things kind of bring up some of that darkness that you talked about earlier, even now?
I find it cathartic now. It's like, plus it's a way to educate the public about what's happening. Like your nurse that's stepping into your room, she's professional. She looks sharp. She or he is, they're extremely knowledgeable and they're friendly. Good morning, Ms. Smith. My name is so-and-so. I'm going to start your IV, get your medications. The doctor's already ordered your IV drip. I'm going to get that started. CAT scan has been ordered. They have been notified. They tell us that you're third in line. So we're looking at maybe 30 minutes. Well, that patient is like, man, this place is amazing. And this nurse is really amazing. But that nurse, just one of her other patients, she was just doing CPR on, and lost. And she's grieving because she got to know the family a little bit. And the person died right in front of them. They were talking about what they're going to do in the summer. And with their grandkids coming into town, all of a sudden they clutch their chest and it's the big one. And they're gone. And then she goes to the bathroom, cries a little bit, touches up her makeup, and then steps into room 4. Good morning, Mrs. Smith. My name is so-and-so. I'm going to get your IV and, so forth. So that's why I would tell those stories, was so that the general public would know that when you're sitting in the waiting room, it's hard not to get angry.
Right.
It's the wait time. And my book was designed really to educate the public on this is what's going on back behind the doors, that no one wants you to sit there as long as you're sitting there. And they have actual panels designed of folks, me and everybody else, designed to make it faster for you. Like this is something we actively seek to make your experience quicker, but we cannot jeopardize your safety by making it too fast, right? So that's part of the thing, is educating and telling those stories. It was really cathartic, especially when you're sitting around with a bunch of medics or nurses and you start telling war stories. I remember once me and a buddy were getting into an ER on the 10th floor of the hospital, and then we just pushed our stretcher in, and this guy was walking with from another floor, and he was trying to show off for this girl that he was with, and I was particularly bitter on this day, and he says, "Hey, what's the toughest? What's this?" He didn't realize I had worked at university. This is at the other hospital. He says, "What's the weirdest thing you ever saw?" And he's kind of smirking, and I said, "I had a mom who ate her baby," and then the door closed. She was like mic drop, So, and just the fact that, and we laughed, but then just you think about that in context. What are we laughing about? Like, what has happened to us? It's, and I'll tell you this, Conrad, my Aunt Marcia passed away this morning, and
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yesterday, my dad, it's my dad's sister. We knew it was going to happen, but my dad asked me. I asked my dad last night, "Hey," and this is not a proud moment, not at all. I was walking out the door and I looked at my dad. I said, "Hey, did Aunt Marcia kick the bucket, or is she still with us?" And then I just froze, and I saw his face, and I had to apologize. I says, "I'm so sorry, Dad. That just came right out of the ER. Like, that just came from some dark place." Because it's been 2.5 years since I've worked EMS and all that stuff. But that's what happens. You get so callous towards death. It's even your own family. My Aunt Marcia, I love.
What do you hope the book can accomplish for people who read it?
Oh, that's such a good question. My dream would be to get that book into the hands of all leadership, fire, police, EMS, hospital, because I wrote an article on April 12th. It was published in GEMS magazine. Are you familiar with GEMS, the Journal of Emergency Medical Services? It's national, and I remember like all the fire departments would have the magazine back when they published. They don't publish anymore. It's just internet. But I did an article for them. It was called "Leadership: Own Your Responsibility," and I'm challenging leadership to take responsibility for the mental well-being of their employees. It's like a conveyor belt of, there's always someone that can take your place, right? No one's irreplaceable. But do leaders have the character to care about their people? And in the article, I say that our leadership would have Nurses Week or Emergency Medical Services Week, and they would, any EMS crews that came in, they would have pancakes or nacho bar, this and that, to show appreciation. And the same for us. We would have these amazing Jason's Deli buffets, and so we always felt, Conrad, appreciated. Not once would I ever not feel appreciated, but that took care of my I need to be appreciated part, but was never addressed was the PTSD part, the mental health. And that's what my book is challenging. I want to challenge leadership. Take ownership of your folks. They are working their butts off for you. Nurses are skipping lunches. They're taking 5 minutes for lunch, if they even take a lunch, and they get right back out on the floor. Now their shift is 6:45 to 7:15, but they're not leaving until 8:30. Why? Because they're tremendous people, and they're leaving a clean department, and they're documenting, and they're having a great shift report and turnover. But what are we doing for their mental well-being? I wonder how much more we could have got out of these tremendous people with this tremendous experience. Just even myself, for instance, 21 years. Like, if I had the tools in the beginning, how much longer could I have made it in that field? The average is 2 to 4 years, and then people move on. But you're losing that experience level. If they had the tools to process what they're seeing and what they're experiencing, how much longer could they last? And then how much more productive? And then that impacts the family life.
It'd be interesting to do a study to see if the work length span of people in a trauma unit, has shortened over the years, versus, today versus 20 years ago. How long are people working? Are they working less time? Are they moving on quicker? It'd be interesting to study
My
that.
gosh, I would love to see those stats. Yeah.
Mm.
I would love to see those stats.
And
I
over the
wish that there was
years,
a tracker.
over your
I'm
experience,
sorry, go ahead.
did the ER change? I mean, today we have more and more people without insurance, and they use the ER as their doctor. Have you seen that kind of thing change and make the ER, even trauma center, a busier place because of that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this last ER that I worked at, it's the one ER. I worked in 3, trauma and then the other 2, but it's the one ER where absolutely every staff member bought in on 150% every day. So they really got it down with their procedures from when you first check in. It is streamlined. And sadly, and this is a big complaint, Conrad, a big complaint is that nurses enjoy being able to put a hand on a shoulder. I remember Peggy. Remember I mentioned Peggy earlier, nurse. We were getting crushed one day. I mean, just one after another. And there was an elderly woman who was dying. And her family had called from out of state and said that just to cease all operations, that they would be there. Something like that. I had some kind of a thing, and they were going to let her go. And we just kept on working, And here's this lady who had this long life and these experiences and raised children and had grandchildren, and she's just on this lone, cold stretcher with this light just right in her face from up above. And you know what Peggy did? She walked over there, even though we were getting killed, even though she was getting killed. She walked over and she went to her locker. She got a brush out, her own brush. She started brushing her hair, and she just sat in a chair beside her and said, just talking to her, talking about what a wonderful life she must have had, and the wonderful things that she must have seen in the span of life that she had, the changes in air transportation, and she was going through World War II and all of the 50, and she just took her on this journey. And caressing her hair, caressing her cheek, tucked her in, brought her sheets up, made a little crease in them, put her arms on it like she had been tucked in by her mom. She taught us a lesson that day. She didn't have to say nothing. She taught us a lesson. That, sure, we're getting people through fast, but we're losing that human element, and that's dangerous because then you get cold. Yeah.
What is broken about our medical system, and what needs to change to make things get to a better place?
Mental health, not for medical staff, but for the public. A large majority of our clientele were there with mental health issues, and the funding had been lost by several agencies in town, and our department was just inundated. And as you know from your experience, they require a lot of attention. And if you leave psych patients, and I hope that's not disrespectful saying it that way, but if you leave them in a room together, they start feeding off of each other with their energy. And it gets super dangerous. And so you're having to devote so many resources and staff. Typically somebody who tried to strangle their grandmother should be a 1-to-1. You know what that means? Like one person,
Yep.
You're sitting on them, keeping an eye on them.
Sure.
But we would have 1-to-14,
Wow.
And it's just dangerous. And because we couldn't spare the staff, there's just, with the cost of everything, there's just no other way. The ER is just going to have to be the clinic for everybody. It's just going to have to be that. And we've all accepted it. there's no illusions about not me anymore, but what they face.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way it's going to be.
So I want to ask this, and if this makes you uncomfortable, that's, I apologize ahead of time, but you obviously were a person of faith, and you were going off, you're hoping to go off to seminary. How did your experience working in trauma affect your faith?
That's a good question. Working in trauma made me realize, because I had gone to a independent fundamental Baptist college, and you know what that means.
Yeah. I grew up in the church and understand those things. So yeah.
Yeah. So that's extreme, right?
Yep.
That's extreme. So most of my buddies, when they got married, when they kissed their wife, that was the first time they had ever kissed a girl. It was on their wedding day. When I came from that background of everything is black and white, well, now I'm in the county ER, and now all of a sudden I'm working beside, folks who are gay. I didn't even know anybody who was gay before.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what, Conrad? I found out they're not snatching people off the streets. They're not snatching little children off and molesting them. I found out that Tabitha, she's pretty freaking awesome. Like, she's freaking brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, she's cool.
Mm-hmm.
And it challenged a lot of things that I had been thinking about,
Mm-hmm.
So as far as my faith goes, a lot of my beliefs had been challenged. However, and by the way, I'm so thankful for that, because, when I eventually or later got married, one of my groomsmen was gay, and it just grew me up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so thankful for that. But there were times, though, when I was in the ER, when you see all the folks that are say that they're the devil or this or that, or
Mm-hmm.
they act a certain way to get attention. But there were thousands of those. There were a couple. There were a couple where I was like, the hair on the back of your neck stands up, and there's 3 or 4 voices coming out of their
Mm-hmm.
mouth at the same time. And that's real. I've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're dealing with something that's ancient.
Yeah.
And I never went into those situations boastful.
Mm-hmm.
I never went in prideful
Mm-hmm.
and thinking, I'm going to make a difference in here, and I'm going to show the devil.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
You go in humble, or you're going to get hurt.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
No, but it solidified my belief, my faith, definitely.
Mm-hmm. What did taking time to write your book, what did that do for you in your thought processes and your journey toward wellness?
It took me about a good year and a half before I could put, quote, pen to ink, or, ink to paper. It took me a while, just because the thought of it would make me nauseous, physically nauseous. I knew at one point I was going to do it, so I had notes all over the place as little reminders so that I wouldn't forget stories. And that's where this journal came in handy. But when I started, when I had made, and this is really interesting too, my girlfriend, because of my PTSD and all that, I eventually ended up we got divorced and this and that because of the things that happened. And it was just, and my current girlfriend now, I was telling her I have all these books that I want to write. I did 2 with my dad about his time in Iraq and Afghanistan with the war dogs. I did 1 with Pulitzer Prize winning author Mitch Weiss about my grandpa in World War II in Iwo Jima. And then I said, okay, I got those done, and I want to do these other ones. I want to do another World War II one. I want to do one about Africa, and I want to do one about my ER experiences. And she's like, well, which one do you think you'll do first? And I was like, I just can't make up my mind. So she said, I'll tell you what, why don't you go on YouTube and Google this guy. His name is Muji. And do you know who Muji is?
No.
And he's a spiritualist. He did a lot of training in India and China. And she said, just Google him and just listen to what he has to say. The room totally dark, lay in your bed, totally relaxed, arms outstretched, legs outstretched. Just release your breath a couple times, deep breaths, and then hit play. So I'm like, okay, I'm Texas, like this is some hippie stuff here. I don't know. So, but I and this is something that came from the ER, was that I don't know everything, right? This life experience. And I was like, well, what I'm doing obviously isn't working, right? So I'll try. So I lay down on my bed, I hit play, and Muji starts talking, and I start thinking about what he's telling me to think about. Let go of what he's telling me to let go of. And Conrad, it just went, ER. And I just hopped out of bed, called her immediately, and was like, it's the ER. And then from that point on, I had this piece about writing it, and it just flowed out of me, and it was just perfect. And it was very cathartic. But, there were times though, especially reading, because what I would do is I would write a chapter and then read it to my family, or read it to her, and then I would cry, cry really hard. And to me, it's like honoring them, the memory of those folks, and I guess I don't ever want to get to the point where it doesn't bother me, or, I just always want to remember,
What do you do today to take care of yourself and your mental health?
So I listen to a lot of music that's almost like new age, and very peaceful. And I do a lot of outdoor stuff, connect with a lot of outside. Alaska is one of my favorite places on the planet. And I go to Alaska a lot, and I'll just sit in the grass and take my shoes off, or even here, and well, I can't do it too much here because the fire ants. I'll listen to music or read, spend time with my girls. They get kind of annoyed because I'm just like, I love you so much. I just need you to know that. Like, I just need you to know that you're the most important thing on this planet that we need to take advantage of now. Like, don't assume you have tomorrow. And that gets me emotional, but it's like, you just love them so much, and you're just so thankful for the time that you have. And that's what I do, is spend time with my girls, Lauren and Brooke, and writing really helps. And I get a lot of purpose now, a sense of purpose, from trying to keep medics alive. I'm trying to keep medics, nurses, paramedics, police, firemen. I'm trying to keep them alive. I heard back from someone who read my book, a paramedic in Detroit, and she reported to me that in the last couple of years, they had 10 medics kill themselves up there. And, I know my ER, we had a doctor that killed himself a couple of years ago. That's my purpose now, is keep them alive. I want to make sure that leadership takes on this responsibility, and because we're not going to do it, we don't want to be seen as weak, or that needs to change too, right? It's not weak to get help. You're strong if you're getting help, because then you're prolonging your vitality in your work, and you're going to keep your family unit alive and thriving if you deal with it. And
if you could go back to your 20-year-old self, what would you tell yourself?
I would say, you need to, if I could walk in and say, Dennis, you need to realize that when Danielle Reina Reynosa died, she may have still died if her parents had her in a seatbelt. She may have died 3 days later, crossing the street, getting hit by a car. She may have died a year later of leukemia. Do not assume that these folks have a long life ahead of them and that it was shattered by this horrific event. I don't know if that makes sense, Conrad, but I would say that my counselor she said, where did you learn this idea that life is fair?
Hmm.
You know, where do you see that in nature? And she said, I want you to think about one event. And of course it was Danielle. And she says, and I want you to write about it. I want you to tell me how it makes you think about how you feel about yourself, about safety, your relationships, trust, interactions, intimacy. You know, she listed like 6 or 7 things. And she says, do at least a page. And I was bitter at the time, and I didn't think I would get a page, but I said I would try. It ended up being 3 pages, and then she went through it line by line with me the following time. And she said, I want you to read it to me, and then we're going to read it again, and I want you to highlight what I tell you to highlight. So we went through, she says, highlight that, highlight that, highlight that. She says, what you just highlighted are stuck points.
Mm.
They are things that you believe about this event that are not based on fact. And of course that irritated me, right? And she warned me ahead of time that I would be angry in this treatment. And one of them was, if she had her seatbelt on, she would have made it, you know? And she says, how do you know? How do you know that the force wouldn't have been enough that she still would have died? It's weird, Conrad, but I could actually feel after that, as we went through that session, I could feel like almost like weight falling off of my shoulders. She says, what do you believe? Was that based on emotion or was that based on fact? I had to be honest, right? So I says, that was all emotion. She said, you were rightly upset. You were rightly sad. I mean, so much so that I cut out her, and I took, and her little brother, we put this on his shirt when he was standing there beside his sister. And then he took it off and it dropped on the floor, and I stuck it in the journal. That was 1998. So she said, those are all emotion. And the facts are, you don't know if she would have survived. So just that tiny little thing I would say to that old dentist, like, don't go there. You don't know anything about what should have been, what could have been. It's not. I think that's how Peggy and Sandy and the others that have been doing it for 40 years, I think that they're masters of that. Yeah, I think that they're masters of that ability. But they are so compassionate to the worst. Even after 40 years, she'll sit beside somebody and take time and brush their hair as they're passing on. It's just remarkable.
Wow. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I thank you for sharing your story and for the work that you did over those years. The last thing I'd like you to do is just speak to that paramedic, that emergency room nurse, that doctor who's in the middle of it and they're not sure if they want to keep on going. Talk to them, and what should they do? What can they do next to get to a better place in their head?
I would say I would preemptively get a counselor. Like, I wish that it was in the books for these departments that it's a requirement. They have a counselor on staff who maybe even once a month calls in everybody at different times, and you have 30 minutes and everyone's required to go. And there's a sign-in sheet to show that you were there. Now, whether you stay the 30 minutes is up to you, but the opportunity for you to talk and say what's bothering you. Because, Conrad, how amazing would it have been if in 1998 I could have walked in to a counselor and said, you know, Danielle, she would have survived if her parents had just put her in a seatbelt. Well, then the counselor could have said, well, how do you know she still would have survived? It challenges you, and you're like, well, I don't know that. Like, oh, you know, something simple like that. So I would preemptively, if a department is not going to take responsibility and ownership on taking care of their people's brains and their hearts, then I would say preemptively Get a counselor that not some, buddy down at the bar, but a professional who can actually help you, and you can tell anything to, and it is legally going to stay there forever. And just talk. Say what happened on Thursday. Imagine that, Conrad, if you could go in and talk about what happened on Thursday instead of what happened back in 1998, 20 years ago, that's been haunting you for 20 years. How sad is that? That's my story. How sad is that? Like, I wish I had had the courage to get a counselor back then. And that's what I would say to the medics and the nurses and whatnot. Have the courage to get a counselor, someone that you can talk to, about these things. That's what I would. I really would. Because it's gonna increase your vitality in your work. It's gonna keep your home safe. Because when you think about it, the one thing God gave you was your kiddos and your wife. That's your responsibility. You love saving people from fires. You love saving people from hostage situations. You love doing CPR on somebody and bringing them back. But at the end of the day, the one thing, the most important thing is that God gave you those kids because he knew that you were going to be the best thing for them. And if you're not keeping yourself sharp, if you're not keeping yourself mentally okay, you're letting all of them down. You can't blame anybody but yourself. And I blame myself for many of the faults with my marriage and whatnot, that I didn't get help when I did. And I was morose and quiet and sitting alone in my room and angry and testy. I failed. I failed them. And though my girls always had love and the way I describe in the book, Conrad, and I'm sorry if this is getting long, but the one joy that I had every day was between the time I got home and the time, because when I got home, I would get my girls their bath, I would brush their hair because their mother worked at opposites than I did. I would brush their hair, do the teeth, tuck them into bed, read a story, have prayers, kisses, walk to the door, turn around. We call them kiss blows. Kiss blows, kiss blows. And then they're doing the same back and forth, and it goes on for a few seconds. And then I close the door, and then I turn around, and I take a couple steps, and then I look at my bed, which I know is going to haunt me all night long. And I just figuratively close the door on the only happiness that I was going to have that day. So, I'm sorry I got off subject, but
no worries. Well, this has been a really fascinating discussion. I want to let people know where they can find your book, how they can contact you, things like that.
Sure. The book is on Amazon. So when you put in clear, make sure you put in the exclamation mark. Otherwise, you're going to get a bunch of lotions and stuff. Page upon page of lotions. Or you could put in clear, exclamation mark, and then my name. You'll notice the cover. It's got AFib, which is death, but survivable if you defibrillate. And that's why clear, and then normal sinus rhythm afterwards on the cover. It's got many meanings, which you'll discover when you read the book, everything that it means. But and then as far as email, you can do dennis.firstresponder@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your copy of the book. I had a nice signed copy, so thank you for that. I really appreciate that. It's been...
No, thank you so much for this opportunity. And I want to take this time, if I could, just to say, I just am so thankful for all of the work and effort you put into this documentary that's coming out. And I cannot wait to see it, because I think it's absolutely perfect timing, and it's going to make a huge impact. And Conrad, you need to know that what you did, all of the work, all of the labor, raising the funds, traveling everywhere, sleepless nights, staying in sorry hotels with rowdy neighbors, everything that you did is going to save lives. It's going to save medics. And That's very appreciated.
Dennis, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for the book that you wrote and for your work that you're doing to help first responders and those in emergency medicine thrive and to prosper. I know it's an important subject, and thank you for the work that you are doing. And thank you for watching and listening tonight to this program. If you feel so led and want to help support the work that we're doing for first responders, there's a link below in the show notes where you can make a contribution toward our film and toward this podcast. We really appreciate all the support that has been given to us already, and for the support that you can provide us. We'd greatly appreciate it. And if you feel so led, please leave us a review. Let us know what you think about the show and how we can improve in what we're doing. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And I'll talk to you again soon right here on PTSD 911 Presents.